I'm Stephanie Beloris, your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, I'm joined by Principal Analyst Tracy Wu to discuss a new specification that could revolutionize cloud cost management and FinOps. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about what's going on in the cloud market. I mean, I can say just for myself, cloud costs has been one of the hottest topics that clients have been asking us about.
Absolutely.
And I think it's something that you talk about on a daily basis. What is going on in the cloud market right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really hot topic. So I cover cloud costs, but I also cover hybrid cloud management, cloud skills, cloud teams, industry clouds, and cloud governance.
What? We have not given you enough work, Tracy.
I love it. I love being able to talk about all these different things. But I cover all of these different things. I would say that in 2023, I'd say 90% of my inquiries were about cloud costs. From the vendor side, everyone's trying to jump in and provide tooling around that. From the end user side, I get a lot of questions about it, even still today, which is just things like, how do I maximize the value of my cloud investments? How do I get control of my cloud costs? How do I reduce cloud spend? How do I make sure that my cloud spend is helping me to achieve my initiatives and my target? And what really prompted this? So this whole momentum and this whole shift was something that was already rising and already happening. And I would say that the pandemic really kicked things off, where people were thinking there's going to be a recession happening, there's a pandemic, and people started to turn their attention to it, especially because cloud was becoming this more and more mainstream infrastructure strategy where it wasn't necessarily before. Before it was really POC, and now it's something that you see almost every enterprise adopting. I'd say every enterprise that I talk to has adopted, and I'd be really surprised if anyone is still on premises fully. And then after the pandemic, we started to see the recession, and people were really pushing to try to be efficient with their cloud spend, because even in a down economy, even with people laying off folks, there was one area that still kept on increasing in their cloud spend, and that was really that technology. Like even in last year, we saw this year over year enterprise spend go from 32 million to 35 million annually. And that's not a huge jump, but it's pretty notable considering that a lot of companies were cutting costs. They were cutting individuals, but cloud was seen as this necessary part of every company's strategy out there.
Right. And I think we're about 10 years into cloud, more or less. And it's interesting. Like I think in the beginning, like maybe the first 5 years, part of why you moved to the cloud was because it was less expensive. And at the time, they weren't known as the hyperscalers, but, the early cloud providers, I mean, they were offering dirt cheap costs to move your workloads to the cloud because they just wanted to gain market share. And now that's totally flipped, that's not really part of the value proposition, is that cloud is cheaper. You're going to the cloud because of scale, because of flexibility, maybe even resiliency. I mean, heck, even security could be better in the cloud. So you're going for a variety of reasons that are more business oriented as opposed to just being about costs. So, I mean, it's interesting then too, like, I feel like we've also heard in some cases, organizations changing their cloud strategy, which is, yes, anything that's customer facing and needs that scale, and needs that kind of like performance, we'll put that in the cloud. But maybe it's some batch process that runs 24/7. Let's keep that on-prem because that just makes no sense financially to move to the cloud. So it's interesting to see how like the discussion has evolved. But more than just we're continuing to move workloads to the cloud. I think right now our data says it's about 45% of workloads have moved to the cloud. So there's some cloud workloads that will never go, some that still could go. But what is it? Is it just the costs themselves, or is it also something else about managing the costs that have people up in arms about cloud costs?
Yeah. And like you were saying, I think up until about 2021, it went from this POC kind of suspicion, help me convince my managers that cloud isn't necessary, to we need to get everything to the cloud because we need to digitally transform yesterday. And it was happening almost with no thought and no intention behind it. And then now we're in this stage, and I think it was into 2022, late 22 to 23, where it was sort of cloud as necessary. Like you were saying, there are some areas where you have consistent usage profiles, you're not scaling, you don't have these volatile workloads where it doesn't make sense for it to be in the public cloud. And so this part about cloud costs has been something that has just been increasing momentum. And there's been a lot of different reasons why people have been looking at it. But really, first it was, let's get transparency, let's get visibility. And you've seen cloud cost managers, at least tooling side of it, was all about, can we see costs within all of our different clouds?
Mm.
Can we just at least optimize or do some areas of being able to remediate or identify different waste within the cloud? And then it became even bigger than that. And I think that's what we're seeing in this new generation of cloud cost management, which is how do we make sure that every button click, every keystroke is helping us to achieve our business initiatives and our business goal? And that's sort of the big underlying vision that's happening out there. Like, it's always been there, but it hasn't been the necessary and the predominant focus right now as it is now. This whole area of cloud unit cost economics is really coming up, and it was something that was sort of brought to light and really validated at reInvent last year. You heard Werner Vogel, CTO of Amazon.com, go on the stage and start saying things like, every engineering decision is a buying decision. You need to think about cost. You need to think about it intentionally. He even brought up this whole area around sustainability. Cost is a close proxy to sustainability as well. That's another huge area or initiatives that's coming up around cloud costs as well. And cloud cost management, at its core, is really about asset management. It's about gaining visibility in the cloud, understanding where your resources are, how they're being used, how efficient you are, and how is that affecting your entire organization. The other part about cloud costs is that this means that I had mentioned you're operationalizing your cloud. And that also means that organizations have to work differently. And so instead of this quarterly, monthly, maybe half-yearly report of like, this is our spend because we're on premises and everything is static. Now you're in cloud spend, where even if you don't change your cloud usage, your cloud spend can drastically change just based on how cloud is being priced. And so there is this requirement now where people want folks to be more individually responsible for that. So there's this idea around allocation, chargeback, showback. There's this idea around everyone is responsible for their spend. Because of that, they want different cross-functional teams talking to each other. So now it's your finance team, even your procurement team, your engineering team, your operations team, IT. They all need to start talking to each other on a daily basis to make sure that they're on the same page. Because if you're not on the same page, you have this cloud admin that's running around saying, hey, engineering, why is this anomalous spend? Finance is breathing down my neck. And then engineering says, oh, we're having a huge deployment. We're trying to go to production quickly. And then they run back to finance and say, hey, this is the reason why. And then they run over to procurement and say, hey, can you figure out a better enterprise discount for us? And then they're also trying to figure out rate optimization. So there's this whole area around commitment-based discounting that all of the cloud providers provide that can be very useful. Like, if you do it right, you can spend almost 72% less of your cloud spend. If if you do it incorrectly, then you can be overcommitting, because the whole idea around it is you can do 1 year or 3 year commitment. You commit to amount of spend and you get this major discount. Now, the problem with that is if you are spending less than amount, you are still accountable for that cloud spend. So that can be a form of cloud waste as well. And as a result of that, we have said at Forrester, and this is something that's really being touted by the entire FinOps community, which is you need to have a specific dedicated role, a specific dedicated FinOps practitioner that is looking at all of these specific areas. And in an ideal world, it wouldn't just be one person. It would be lots of different folks that are trying to get people on board. This reason why you're changing has met with a lot of resistance, though. So especially at the engineering level, these engineers are saying, hey, you are giving us the same deadlines. We still need to turn on and use the same products or deliver the same products. But now all of a sudden you want us to count costs on a per second or a per minute basis. As an engineer, that can create a lot of resentment because all of a sudden they're now being asked to, oh, don't provision that t-shirt size. That's going to create too much cost. And then, or they're getting recommendations from the tooling that says, you really need to right size your compute or your storage resource because that is based on our calculations and what this tool says, this is an area that you are overspending. And for an engineer, this can be almost an ego hit because they're saying, I know my application. I know my workloads. How dare you, this tool that I don't know anything about, provide this recommendation to me? And so there's been this new push around sustainability, going back to that of, certainly part of it is reporting, and there's been this push, not just regulatory, but also from shareholders and stakeholders that are saying we want to minimize the carbon footprint. But the other side of it too is providing a sustainability dashboard is a way of also engendering adoption. Because some folks are just saying, I don't care about how much I spend. I don't care if you put it up in a newsletter or on a channel or on a dashboard and you show that I'm spending more than everyone else. I don't care. Like for a lot of organizations that works just to show that amount of spend. For some, it doesn't. But it might help to say, hey, your carbon footprint, your impact on the environment is far greater than everyone else because of the amount of spend that you are using. And it also is unnecessary investment as well.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. So let's start off with sustainability. I mean, for those who listen to the podcast on a regular basis, I'll just kind of repeat myself. The IT footprint, when it comes to carbon footprint, it's very large. On average, it's 25 to 30% now. And then in some industries like financial services, I know of one client where it's actually somewhere between 55 to 60% of their entire organization's carbon footprint is coming from IT. So that's why there's so much focus on the carbon footprint of IT. Is it's for a lot of organizations, it's growing and it's becoming the biggest chunk. Even in organizations like manufacturing, it can still be as high as 10 to 12% of their footprint. Another little side tidbit, which I always think is interesting, the country of Ireland, 15% of their entire country's footprint is from IT because of all the data centers they host in the country. Yeah, it is. So I understand. So at the same time, though, a lot of the cloud providers are moving to renewables, but they're not quite there yet. There's no necessarily guarantee that your cloud service is consuming renewable energy. They're all moving in that direction, but there's no guarantee. So then it's still showing up in your SOC 3 emissions.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's these different levels like scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And I think most cloud providers have been pretty upfront about it. You're talking about your Azure, your Google Cloud, your AWS. Pretty transparent with it. Scope 3 is really different in that it's all about all of your other waste, your areas of not just your waste, but your partners. What is the impact down the chain? And that can be a huge hassle to report. So this is an area where Azure and Google have been relatively transparent about their scope 3 emissions. AWS has promised this as well. They do offer some scope 3 emission data, but they've offered to provide much, much more transparency there, and they haven't. I mean, AWS has probably been one of the ones that have been slower to provide data, slower to adopt, slowly to take on that momentum, mainly because they haven't needed to. They are the cloud leaders. They have the most dominant cloud market share by far. There is no doubt about that. We've seen that within some of the court filings that, we thought that the revenue of Azure and AWS were actually quite close, and they weren't. It actually showed that Azure is still about half of what AWS's revenue is. And so there's still a lot of caching that needs to happen which is why Azure and Google Cloud are much more willing to play ball with multi-cloud agreements, with doing sustainability requirements, with joining the FinOps Foundation, and then we'll go into that a little bit, with joining the Focus Standard, another thing that we'll go into. They've been much, much more willing to say, hey, we're great participants. We love the community. We love our supporters. And certainly part of it is, okay, they can be good corporations, but the other part of it too is that they are trying to get more and more engagement and more cloud adoption. AWS doesn't need that. I mean, certainly they do. Every company needs to grow and transform and continually adopt and evolve their strategy. But AWS hasn't necessarily had that incentive to do that until lately, when you've seen a lot of different shifts happening within the cloud space.
Right. So we have the pressure coming from sustainability and wanting to reduce carbon footprint. And then obviously it's just, the costs themselves. People just want to reduce costs and save money and be more operationally efficient. But a couple of the things that you've said, you mentioned there's dedicated tools, there's the Focus Standard. So I guess and then you also mentioned that, depending on the cloud provider, they have all these complex discounting programs. So what I'm hearing is that every cloud provider does billing a different way.
Yeah, they do. They do. And this is their way of kind of saying, like, we are not following each other. This is how we differentiate from each other. But it goes so silly as things like AWS calls their accounts. Azure calls accounts subscriptions. Google Cloud calls them projects. And it's just these silly little things where you have this sort of differentiation because it's about, well, we are our own cloud and we have our own identity. And so they've started to do things like, well, certainly Azure and AWS have much more similarity in terms of how they label other things. Like they call tags, how you would tag your resources so that you could group them, you can allocate costs. It's really a necessary part of cloud cost management to have the right tagging, the right tagging hygiene, and something that we'll go into a little bit later. But AWS and Azure call tags. Google Cloud uses labels and tags. And it can go down to all of these different things. It can go down to how they build out their date, their different constructs. It can go down to how they label and call different specific areas. And so the question that end users have been having and what they've been pulling their hair out has been, why can't this all be the same?
Right. So what I'm hearing then is like the services don't line up. Like they all have different constructs for their services. They have different naming conventions and different pricing strategies and billing strategies and discount strategies. So at the end of the day, if you're trying to compare apples to apples across these cloud providers, it's almost impossible to really do that. I mean, it doesn't even sound like we're comparing apples to oranges. It sounds like apples to, I don't know, a steak. So that's where we're at. So before we get to the Focus Standard, you mentioned FinOps quite a bit. So can we define FinOps for everyone?
Absolutely. And this definition has evolved and changed. This is an area where people have thought and mistakenly thought, oh, FinOps, like DevOps, is development and operations. And people have said FinOps is financial operations. It is not financial operations. It is a combination of DevOps and operations that is meant to be this collaboration among different cross-functional teams for cloud. And that's the thing that they've changed. They've changed the definition. So it's not just about public cloud. It is SaaS costs. It is platform costs. And also your traditional infrastructure costs. All of that falls into the realm of what is considered cloud now for this definition of FinOps. And I'm using the formalized definition that is coming out of the FinOps Foundation. And the reason why I do that is because the FinOps Foundation is at the center of everything that is happening FinOps right now. They continue to push and bring to bear all of the new and leading edge ideas around what happens within FinOps. If you are doing anything around FinOps, you absolutely must be involved with that community. So the other part of it too is that they had created this working group that is called Focus, which is this FinOps open cost and usage specification. And this is this a working group that now has become its own open source project, Linux Foundation backed. They didn't want it to be specifically influenced by any vendor. And so they had made sure that everyone involved doesn't have any specific ownership over the IP. So you have big end users that involved. Walmart is a big one. You have big vendors that involve. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud are all involved within that. You have a lot of different areas coming from every different side. You even have managed services involved as well. And so there are a lot of people invested in getting some standardization across their billing constructs because everyone can benefit. End users obviously can benefit because they don't want these different terms and different have their billing data come out differently. Because if you're like most companies, you are doing some form of multi-cloud strategy, or at least you have your toe dipped in other cloud providers outside of the main cloud provider that you're using. And if you have a cloud administrator that is just managing this one environment that you use, maybe you have 10% of your workloads. If that person leaves and you have no redundancy and no one else that understands that cloud, then all of a sudden that cloud environment is rendered useless. Because a part of understanding your cloud costs is being able to read the billing data that comes from these cloud providers. And it's not like a grocery store receipt where you're like, okay, S3, great, $50,000. Okay, EC2, $100,000. It's not like this line by line. It looks like gobbledygook. And it's really hard to read and discern. And so you rely on things like cloud cost management tools to be able to create some standardization, normalization across these billing data to be able to understand that. But the thing that I tell everybody is don't just rely on these cloud cost management tools to be your single source of truth. You want to make sure that you are understanding exactly what you're being charged on because these tools aren't 100% reliable. And if you get cost allocation wrong even once, you lose the trust of your stakeholders and those that you are either providing some level of chargeback or you're doing some level of showback where you're showing them what they spend. So it's been really important to be able to provide this level of standardization. And what Focus has become is really this rallying cry from the organizations, from the cloud cost management tools, because they have some level of onus of being able to provide the standardization, from your managed service providers and your GSIs saying the same thing. And everyone is saying, we are exhausted. We are exhausted of doing this standardization across these cloud tools. Why can't you all cooperate and do the same thing? And so that's why this momentum behind Focus is a huge thing. Like I talked to J.R. Starman, he's the CEO of the FinOps Foundation. He says, if there is anything the FinOps Foundation is meant to do, it is focus. And it's probably the biggest thing that is happening in the FinOps community right now is this standard.
Okay. So the benefit to enterprises, 100% clear. So the cloud providers, the hyperscalers and some of the other cloud providers, are they on board or are they fighting it because they want to continue to, I mean, I hate to say this, like, create that inability to compare pricing and costs? Like, are they fighting it? Or do they realize that, hey, if we want to continue to grow, if we want to get that 55% of workloads that have yet to move to the cloud, it's time for us to embrace this, or we might actually slow down our own growth?
Yeah. I think Google and Azure were in it from the ground up. And I think that they have the most to gain from that. So AWS has been a little bit more reticent. They were an organization where it was, okay, AWS, when are you joining Focus? When are you joining the FinOps Foundation? And they were pretty resistant to it because they didn't have to be. They didn't have to play nice with the others. They didn't have to roll out any sort of multi-cloud implementation. Like, in fact, even if you had been at reInvent like as recently as 5 years ago, if you said the word hybrid cloud, you would get the wrath of AWS. This is how much and how dominant they were within the cloud space. But like Google Cloud and Azure, AWS has silently rolled out more and more multi-cloud services where they're starting to play nice with the other cloud providers because it's inevitable. there is this multi-cloud push. And if you read, Lee Suster, my public cloud colleague who covers the public cloud space, he has predicted that the future of cloud will become commoditized. It will become abstracted, where it doesn't matter what cloud service you're using. Your cloud environment will be composable, and it won't be about, are you an AWS shop? Are you a Google Cloud shop? It'll just be, what is your cloud? And it won't matter which of the services that it's coming from. Focus is the beginning of that, where it is the beginning of a composable cloud, where they're abstracting away the vendor specificity of it. Now, AWS eventually joined at the end of 2023, and there were parts and factions, to their credit, there was parts and factions at AWS who really were pushing for this, and they really wanted to join. And since they have joined, they've taken a very active role within that. And I'd say probably more active than the other two cloud providers. They're part of the steering committee at Focus. They have joined multiple leadership groups and committees within the FinOps Foundation. They've been very vocal about, what are the new services they're releasing and their recommendations when it comes to these monthly FinOps Foundation Summit meetings. So they've been very, very involved.
What about, we've mentioned a lot about the North American headquartered cloud providers. What about some of the China-based cloud providers? Like, are we seeing, does it matter as much? Like, is Alibaba, Huawei, Tencent, and some of the others, are they also embracing the Focus standard, or is this primarily North America and Europe?
Yeah, I don't see them joining that specifically. I don't think that they are a part of Focus at all. I haven't seen anything there. That being said, though, that unless you are doing business within China, there hasn't really been a push to use those public cloud providers. I think the most I would say is a global entity that has a pretty big and dominant Chinese market will go with a public cloud like Tencent that is based in China.
Okay, so you're based in North America, you're based in Europe. What are your steps from here? I guess there could be a couple of scenarios. Like the vast majority of Forrester clients, you probably already have some footprint in the cloud. As your contracts renew, are you pushing for this? Are you insisting on this?
Yeah, it's still early days. Like, you will talk to organizations fully within the public cloud that are waiting for Focus. They're waiting for it because what they're waiting for is for an AWS specific template that will support the Focus billing standard. Now, AWS has released CUR 2.0, which is their cost and usage report. They said that they will support Focus. It is an area that has been a little bit slower to roll out. Part of that is that they just joined at the end of 2023. They had reInvent, and now they needed to regroup. So they probably needed the first quarter to help provide that level of support. So everyone is looking and waiting for that. And certainly from the cloud cost management tooling providers, at least the leading ones, are saying that they're either involved with Focus, they have plans to provide Focus supported reports, or they're waiting for that.
I guess like one final question then. We've mentioned a lot of the cloud cost management tools. Say everybody embraces Focus. Do you still need a cloud cost tool? Like what's your recommendation there?
That's the question. That's the question that everyone has is, well, what's the point? And it's been an interesting one because DIY, do-it-yourself cost management tooling is on the rise. And this is data that's come out of the FinOps Foundation. They do this FinOps survey every year. It's pretty really great data. So if you want to know about what's happening within the FinOps space, I would look at their report. But this is an area where it's starting to become more and more of a concern for cloud cost management tools. And it's a question that I pose to the third-party cloud cost management tools too, is what are you doing about this? And what I'm talking about is that all of the cloud providers, at least among the major ones, they all provide some form of native cloud cost management capability. Like Google now has a FinOps consultancy service. They have a FinOps score that you can use to score how well your FinOps organization is, that you can publish on LinkedIn. They have FinOps certified their Gemini, which is their generative AI capability for FinOps use cases. Azure has done something similar in terms of releasing their whole Azure cost management. And, they were originally the first ones that embedded cloud cost management capabilities into their cloud environment with the 2017 acquisition of Cloudin. And they've slowly started to degrade some of that or deprecate some of the multi-cloud capabilities within this. And then AWS, it's really done a 180 where not only has it gotten very good, where you saw folks using the native cloud management tools, including AWS, alongside their third-party tools, because they're mostly free, at least at the basic level. But now they're starting to supplant them. And the level of development among the hyperscalers in terms of building out these capabilities has really started to push the needle in terms of what should be available for cost management, which is just really exciting to watch. Like, they are doing things that even the most leading cost management tools aren't doing, like serverless right-sizing, like GPU recommendations. And they are dedicating a ton of product teams around this. I had a chance to talk to the AWS cost management team at RuneMet, and it is incredibly exciting what they are doing, the roadmap that they shared with me. And because of that, because these tools are generally much, much, much cheaper, what you're seeing out of folks that are probably north of 100 million in annual spend, they are coming up with these product teams that are focused around this sort of semi-DIY capability, where they are taking these native cloud management tools because their capabilities are API extractable, and they are building a dashboard around that using some form of business intelligence tool, like a Power BI, like a Tableau, or a Looker, or even in some cases, QuickSight even. And they are using that to build their own dashboard, because what I've heard is most cost management tools will price you on a percentage of cloud spend. But even if you were getting charged 1% of cloud spend, if you're at 100 million, $1 million for a tool that meets your needs only halfway is still a ton of money. And so it's either we go with this third-party off-the-shelf tool and spend a ton of money and spend a ton of time customizing it, or how about we just use these tools from the native cloud management tools that are generally pretty free, and then they're releasing new and new capabilities that are really exciting for the cost management space, and create these sort of semi-DIY capabilities. Now, people that do this, they have huge product teams behind them, right? So they're anywhere between 15 and 45 folks. So I would not recommend, your SME or even your enterprises that have below 50 million in spend to do this, because it's just not worth it. And if you do something like that, you may be creating a ton of technical debt, because the amount of services that are released by the hyperscalers every quarter is, close to 500 services. So are you like the one person that's really savvy with the Excel sheet or has cobbled together a dashboard via API extraction? Are you going to be staying on top of that? And for the most part, people that have done this have found it to be incredibly overwhelming and not where they can dedicate their time.
Well, great. Well, Tracy, this looks like a great place to end things. Thank you so much for the discussion today. This was really great.
My pleasure.
If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Forrester's What It Means podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. To continue the conversation, follow Forrester on LinkedIn or drop us a note at podcast@forrester.com. Thanks for listening.